course, have done many movies, musicals, all kinds of films too, not just documentaries. So both of you very accomplished. Congratulations on this film, which I don't know how you did it, but to get the Pope and to see it done like this.
This is a man who's opened his heart to the hearts of all of humanity. This is a man who cries with humanity, who laughs with humanity, who suffers with humanity. This is Pope Francis.
La humanidad vive una crisis.
I'm convinced that we can make a difference. I'm sure. Pedimos perdón por los abusos sexuales por parte de miembros cualificados de la Iglesia.
We sat across from each other, and he said, Juan Carlos, the first thing I want to tell you is that I apologize for the pain that the church has caused you. I never thought I'd see that day.
I think God made him experience what people experience.
Seems like almost an impossible thing. I mean, for a filmmaker walking in and doing this, tell them your crazy idea that you could pull this movie off, and how did it go?
After two movies that you just mentioned, Pitch on Fire and Christ from Syria, I do have a serious situation that I was struggling psychologically. I was in the war in Syria, and previously I was in Maidan, and I was looking for hope, but hope on a screen that I can bring, and I found a lot of hope through this journey and through this journey. But seriously, when I came to Vatican, they were already aware of my movies. But they said, you know what, you can start like every filmmaker, make your movie, and then we will decide. But we're not promising you that any kind of interview with the Pope. That was the bottom line. And like every storyteller, like every filmmaker, I started to do my research. I went to Argentina. I met his parents, friends. I met his relatives. I met people who still connected to him. And step by step, I started to get close to this gentleman whom you just saw on the big screen. And in a certain way, this movie uplifted me, changed me, allowed me to see hope in the future, allowed me to believe in myself after all the darkness that I saw in Syria or on the streets of Maidan, and also allowed me to change my perspective in life and change my life.
Well, that's amazing to me. And you make it sound so easy. You just got to know all these people, and then, you're just best friends with the Pope, okay? It was that easy.
But it's, at the same time, it was 3 years of making. Yeah. It's got a lot of kind of situations of roller coaster where I was bumping into the walls of Vatican, and I was bumping into the bureaucracy of Vatican. I was trying to find my ways and establish my relationship with him. And I think through these 3 years, it was trust that I built with him, with Pope Francis. I allowed him to learn about myself and what I achieved in my previous movies, and all my movies became like call for action, advocacy, activism, and action. And I think that's what attracted him, because he's a man of action. And we can see it obviously from the screen. And what I, as a filmmaker, witnessed and observed and documented, is his actions and my conversations with the people whose hearts and minds he touched. Specifically, for example, on sexual abuse, where these events literally were uncovering all the time in front of me. They were all the time unfolding in front of me since 2018, and many other moments. And I think that's allowed me to establish this relationship and to make this movie. But it's not an easy kind of journey. That was observing different cuts of the movie, and he saw how before pandemic it was different story, and how, for example, pandemic that none of us in 2018 was even thinking that moment, how pandemic literally changed the cut, changed the whole narrative, and helped me to accomplish this story. And in certain points, you know what, Pope literally helped me to finish this, and it was through pandemic.
It's amazing, yeah, Ted. So you saw the possibilities here, and you saw it evolve. Talk about it from the point of view of a producer. Why you thought this was so important to get made and worth rolling the dice on?
Well, from a personal view, we had hopes that this movie could get finished before the election, right? And for me, having spent, like all of us, the prior 4 years in an atmosphere where you weren't seeing leadership by tolerance, or leadership by forgiveness, or leadership by generosity, you know, and you know, you live your life and you think like that's the way it's got to be. But here was a different example, and that is, you know, trust, confidence, and love outwardly, like it's genuine, and going through the cuts and seeing the relationship, and then when Evgeny brings the film to show the Pope, and all of that, you know, you hear filmmakers say how close they are to this subject and the relationship that's there, but I don't think I'm supposed to say this, but I still never thought I would see the Pope bring a birthday cake to the director of the movie I was involved in. And it was this mutual, you know, people that give each other trust, confidence, you know, deep kindness of spirit, that I felt was what was the antidote we needed for the past, you know, 4 years previously.
And I want to add something. At the beginning, when I do reach to Pope in 2018, he said he don't want to go on the camera. He said, I'm not an actor. I'd rather go to the end of the world and be with the people in front lines, but I will not go on the camera. And when he realized that I will go to these front lines, and I will bring the stories of these people, and I will bring spotlights on the same issues that is important to him, and I will tell the stories of the people that he wanted to help, that's kind of attracted him, and he saw that I'm delivering what is important for the world to see. And specifically, I think pandemic allowed him to realize that he is limited in travel. So I, through this movie image as a storyteller, can bring this to the bigger world. All these plights of the refugees, Rohingya refugees, all the issues on the genocides, Holocaust, all these important issues on interface in the conflicts. I think for him, this element was also crucial during the pandemic. And I think that's what allows finally to collaborate during pandemic. I was traveling already and filming during the pandemic, and we accomplished it during the pandemic. I think that element also helped to everybody to understand that this movie image can bring all these important messages to the world.
And he had a couple of screenings of this, didn't he?
Yeah.
And so what's his review?
He personally saw parts of the movie. He wants to complete the movie from A to Z, because Pope not watching TV since 1978. It's his commitment to himself. But he saw it by pieces, and he liked it. He supported this. We had 2 screenings at Vatican. Last month, on the 6th of September, we had a screening at Vatican, and he came to literally greet every person who came to this screening. And one other screening we did in May, he did the same. He came to literally greet every person.
He walked the red carpet?
He walked the stairs. Yeah.
I have to tell you, the opening of it's so extraordinary, because you're talking about doing this in the pandemic and things, but I haven't seen anything on film quite that haunting. All those shots of these empty streets, which would cost a film company a fortune or to wait to get, you got naturally here. And the Pope walking in that empty square is so moving in its own way, and like nothing we've ever seen.
I think for me personally, it was the moment where I realized that this square never empty. It's never. St. Peter's Square in Vatican is never empty. And all of a sudden you see empty square and Pope alone walking under the rain, under the sky. It's like end of the world, Armageddon. The race, the human race disappears. And for me, I guess looking at this momentum was, okay, if we will not have the hope into the future, if we will not rethink what we're doing in these days, and this completely fresh perspective will go into the future, that's what will happen. And that's why I'm ending the movie also with the image from the elections and then matching literally 7 years later, because you see elections of March 13th of March 2013, and then you see in April 2020, exactly the same shot of the empty square and he standing there alone.
That's just amazing. Did you have a lot of footage that didn't make the final cut here that we saw? I'm curious as to what you had to let go of. I mean, because look, when you talk what this movie covers, pandemic, police violence, racism, climate, border walls, migration, refugees, LGBTQ, women's empowerment, sexual abuse, Armenian genocide. I mean, I don't think you left anything out, but was there?
The original cut was 6 hours in 2018. 6 hours. Over 100 and something interviews. You only see 20 something interviews in the movie. Over 100 something interviews. Hours with the Pope. When I started the project, I went through archival footage, which basically was for 5 years of his papacy. I've brought from archives of Argentina a lot of private footage. So we literally had 6 hour cut. That was the first. When I ended in 2019, I was 2 hours. 2019 cut was 2 hours 30 minutes, and I remember I was cutting and cutting and cutting. And even right now, I'm preparing to have on DVD and Blu-ray at least 30, 40 minutes of the extras.
Wow. So when you brought it to Ted, did you try to convince him, let's release this as a 6 hour film?
I begged him to, but he was trying to keep it short.
I'm curious, how many filmmakers come to you with like those kind of cuts and say, really, I can't cut?
I think he had an interesting conversation with Colleen Cam, who was trying together with him and others convinced me to do a docu-series on that, because that was Colleen's intention, to do a docu-series. And I said, no, I'm doing a movie, because for me, each of these movies, it's a call for action. And that's one of the reasons through the movie, Pope looking off camera in a conversation, like every other character. And only by the end of the movie, you see Pope addressing the message directed to the audience.
The stories in it, the individual stories are so amazing, but Juan Carlos, that's remarkable, what you got on film there. And just that sequence where the Pope is sitting like this, I want to talk to you, and I'm going to talk to you, and you get so much out of that. And it's a view of him we haven't seen. I think it's the key takeaway on this is humanity that we're seeing here and how he touches people, but how invested he is.
Yes, and I will tell you, I was following this subject specifically from the beginning of the 2018. I met Juan Carlos when first time he was invited to Rome in April. And since that, we literally were spending most of the time together. He even came in 2018 to New York on the same day when Karadima was defrocked, and he was telling me how he, not even believing for the moment that happened to him, that Karadima was defrocked and finally the justice coming to be there. For him, that was the most emotional moments he was spending with me. But I wanted to share with you something else. On this movie, we have another voice of another victim of sexual abuse. During the summit of sexual abuse, I met another Chilean guy. He was sold by Pinochet regime from Chile to German family, who gave him to the boarding school that was governed by the elderly brother of the former Pope Benedict. And he was abused majorly. And he was talking to the bishops in Vatican. And he was a famous violin player. And I said to him, would you like to tell your story now, a movie? And he said, Evgeny, I rather play violin, but not talk. And we brought him to the United States in 2019. And for him, it was a healing moment. We recorded the entire score of this movie with his violin. That was his expression of the kind of his pain, but it was also healing.
Wow. So that's what we're hearing here. That's extraordinary. That's another example of making this movie as you're going along and finding different ways to do it, which I think is so interesting and not always the way it's done. You know, Hitchcock, he had a storyboard, he knew every shot he was going to do. You sort of go in and you shoot it yourself a lot. I noticed the credit as we're standing here, cinematography, there were a couple of names, one of them is yours, but sometimes you just go off with your backpack and go alone. Is that an effective technique for you as a filmmaker?
I think it's just saves time. You're just taking a camera, jump into the plane, not in today's world, because today you need to do PCR test and all these things. But in the previous times, you just jump into the plane and going. And I think since Winter on Fire, since Cries from Syria, I used to take my camera in my backpack and just go and film. And that's allowed me to have sometimes the most exclusive and the most fascinating shots. With this movie, I've been everywhere in the world, and most of the stuff I filmed for myself. And actually, the other credit that I have here, it's one of the students of UCLA, because this movie, we created a partnership with the Theatre, Film and Television School of UCLA, and I brought girls that just finished the school into my set, and one of them was a cinematographer. So I literally hired them to start to work on a set.
And that wasn't part of the deal with UCLA, that was just something that happened.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, a friend of ours, another filmmaker, trying to explain the difference between fiction film and non-fiction film, is like, you know, fiction film, people are taking the paint off the palette and putting it onto the canvas. But to make a documentary, you have to sculpt away the stone, you know, to get to what's there. It takes 6 hours. I think that's pretty accurate, except if it gets the first part. You have to go in and mine the stone first. You know, you dig up all the stone, then you cut it all away.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what he's been doing, you know, through this.
And what, you know, with your background and everything, what has made you a champion of filmmakers like him and this form, documentary?
Well, I think that the first part that always gets me excited is, you know, somebody that's not going to settle for good enough, right? That we have so much stuff that's out there, you know, and you have to keep working to try to find the form. Yes, you know, at a certain point you have to abandon the movie and say, okay, now it's done. But that continual process, and through the time, you know, this movie started when I was working at Amazon, and after I left Amazon, we reconnected, and it wasn't yet finished. And it was clear that, you know, there was this critical juncture trying to get it out by the end of the year, so that you could see this unique form of leadership that is Francis, you know, and you're getting pushed and pushed and pushed and got it done, you know, and then like the other piece of it that's also so hard that you have to have the stomach for is the strategy of how to bring your film out and what to do with it, which is a big part of the equation, you know, which was kind of an interesting story, you know, because of when this got finished and where we wanted. It wasn't set up in one of the ideal times of the year to release it, but we wanted to go forward and try to figure out what that is. And we knew there was so much of interest in the film that were good stories that we were hoping the press would want to cover. You can never, you know, strategize and plan and plot and manipulate as much as you wish you could, you know, but if we could have, you know, if you could say like, okay, we're going to be premiering the film in Rome, what do you want to have happen? I wish there was a way we could get a front page news story. You know, I wish that the LA Times, New York Times would want to run something on something like the support of the same-sex unions, but they didn't pick up the story, right? They weren't the ones that picked up the story. We were like, oh my, It's not. What are we going to do? It's not happening. Instead, the more far conservative Catholic newspapers picked it up and made a big deal out of it. And then that's the story that the LA Times and New York Times picked up and put it on the front page.
Controversy sells, that kind of thing. So when they picked up that he's now suddenly changing gears on
they had that, but what they picked up was that the conservative side of the Catholic Church picked up on it, and that sparked it all.
That's interesting.
And really catapulted them forward.
We make a movie people talk about. Yeah.
And I think we still have this controversy going even in the March 2021 when we had the release of the movie. Literally 15th of March, like 11 days before the release, I think New York Times was blowing all this news coming out of the Vatican. Then recently it was again during the summer, and right now even Francis again tried to reiterate to the media and news, you saw it today, last month, hello, I'm standing what I said, and that's what it is. I'm talking about equality, I'm talking about rights of the people, so we need civil rights.
Talk about your style of filmmaking. You don't use a narrator here. You're not telling us what we're seeing. You're just letting it roll. You're letting it play out. And that to me seems like a much harder, much more effective, but very hard thing to pull off, to tell this story the way you want to tell it without having somebody making it easier with narration.
I think I'm always using the people who've been involved into the topics that I'm trying to tell. And at the same time, I'm also trying to use as much footage as I'm able to find on this matter. And if, for example, I'm stumbled in situations of the past, like with Bergoglio and his stuff in Argentina, I try to, for the first time, put a moving image on the stills even, but just because I wanted to create the narrative merged with the images. And I'm always using, you can say talking heads, but that helps me to tell the story without narrator. Because for me, I think the most important to bring a human voices that have been part of this journey and allow them to tell the story. Allow them to kind of take us with the time machine into different times, into different situations, and at the same time to allow us to see these images from the past, from the present. And I think that's the style that I've been using in all three of my movies.
Yeah, it's fascinating too, and all that footage. So the stuff in Argentina, you know, the archival footage. You didn't stint here on talking about the dark side of this man and the criticism he went under and all the stuff that happened in Argentina, and that is something he was totally fine with too, right?
I think what Francis is really about, he's not afraid of critiques on any kind of aspects, and that's what is interesting. He also was keeping distance from me during the filming. He allowed me to tackle any subject, and even in one of the letters during the pandemic, he said, Evgeny, I've always been allowing you to be artist and have your freedom. That's why I was keeping distance. And that's really helps me to be objective. Also, I try to tackle each and every subject matter that related to him, positive or negative, because for me, it was important. I'm not biased, and I'm not trying to tell a story about amazing Pope. I'm trying to tell a story about role model, leader, human being, who made mistakes like every other human, who not afraid to admit these mistakes, but at the same time, from my observation, I saw this human can inspire to do good things. He tried to do good things for others, and I think that was important for me. So I was trying to to cover anything from his past. For me, Dirty Horse is the first story that I heard about him in a couple of places, and I said, I need to tell this story, but I need to allow my audience to judge him on these aspects. And that's why I went to Argentina. I did major research. I learned that Dirty Horse story actually was uncovered by the specific journalists that were related to the enemies of Bergoglio. Like in our situation, Hillary Clinton was kind of accused, crooked Hillary, and it's created narrative from opposite party. I learned that the same happened to him. But I said, I'm not judge here. I rather tell this story through the characters and allow audience to see what exactly happens. Same with his situation on the sexual abuse. I wanted the audience to see him from the beginning, that he was denying this, and I wanted him to admit this, and I wanted him to tell us why he decided to change his mind, what was the purpose of him denying this, and how he reacted, how he found the truth, and how he made change, how he brought change. So I was trying to be really objective on every step of this movie.
And you couldn't tell this movie without confronting those truths. You know, because the world is aware. You know, it was really important. And so many movies you see, you know they leave out that little dark bit. You know, so for both to have the director and the subject willing to confront it, is I think what allows you to, as an audience member, to trust the movie.
Yeah. You aren't Catholic, right?
No, I'm Jewish.
Yeah, what's a nice Jewish boy making a movie about the Pope?
But I think I was always not biased to my stories, because when I did a story about Ukraine, I became enemy of former Soviet Union where I was born. And I never had a relationship to Ukraine, so I not was biased to Ukrainian story. Then, if you're looking at the Christ from Syria, I was raised in Israel, I served Israeli military, and I'm finding myself in Lebanon, in Syria, which two countries that are fighting with Israel. So I'm again telling the story of Syrian nation, which I'm not biased, I'm in opposite side of the direction. And here the same thing, literally, this movie kind of also brought me out of my closet, because during the press conference I came out officially and emphasized why it's important to talk about civil unions. And I think for Vatican, this element specifically was like, wow, we are having here not only Jewish, but also a gay guy who is telling the story of the Pope. And you know what? I'm proud of that, because I'm not biased to the story, I was objective. And I think that's what actually allowed Pope Francis to become even more close to me after I finished the movie.
And you are now a father of a 5.5-week-old, is that right? And you have named him
Francesco.
Full circle.
Frankie.
Full circle, it's amazing. Well, this is on Discovery Plus. Which means you can tell everybody they can see it there, and you know, and keep the word going out on this here, because it is an extraordinary story and very different from. There's so many films out, documentaries, and everything, and so much content. This is truly, I can say, unique and unlike anything else right now.
And I think being 1 year and something inside of our caves, I wanted to open eyes to the audience. I wanted to bring everything from across the globe, because we've been living in kind of bubble. And I wanted to show to the world, yes, we have a struggle, we have disaster, but in the same time, we do have a hope, because I have that hope, but I have also a hope in what I saw in this leadership, because we were missing kind of leadership. And I think that's what inspired me, what changed my life, what allows me to kind of find this hope after all the darkest 2 movies that I did.
Yeah, and what's going on, all you have to do is turn on the news. So this movie does give us hope, and congratulations, both of you, for doing this and coming out to Film Independent here. Thanks.
And thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.